Hello YouTube, I'm Arend Peter. This is part of a series of videos where we're trying to discover how to be informed. At this point, we're getting into the meat of the series where we start figuring out how to break down what's important and what's not. The previous videos were important for setting up the right mindset for the problem, so I'll summarize them real quick to make sure that we're on the same page. The first step to any solution is admitting that we have a problem. So we started off by being comfortable saying, I don't know. One of the follow-up questions was, how can I know? The process for gaining information is actually quite simple. Just study it and ask people questions. Why don't I know is the harder question. I suppose one answer is that no one taught us yet, but since we can't control our past, I think the better angle is to focus on why we still aren't learning. With that in mind, I came up with two primary reasons. The first is that I don't really care. This is similar to I don't know in the sense that it's important to acknowledge that we have this problem in order to make progress. And pretending we don't have it doesn't make it any less true. I don't care then begs the question of why don't I care? And for the purpose of this video, we're going to assume that it's human nature not to care about others by default. I don't care also begs the question of how can I care? And the conclusion was that we can learn to care more by becoming more knowledgeable. Note that I put study as the answer to both how can I know and how can I care. Studying is initially uncomfortable because we don't naturally care, but as we learn to care, it falls more under the first category, where we're studying for the sake of the cause. Moving back up to the why don't I know question, another barrier was I'm intimidated. Intimidation is an understandable reaction given the amount there is to learn, but this can be alleviated by accepting that we won't be able to learn everything, and then prioritizing what's important so that we can focus on that energy. But this can be alleviated by accepting that we won't be able to learn everything, and then prioritizing what's important so that we can focus our energy. That brings us to this video. How do we prioritize what's important? For today, let's use the example of trying to understand the animal kingdom. If we dive into it with the mindset of, there's too much work, I must start now, I don't have time to prioritize, then we'll start with whatever is most interesting to us. A lot of people seem to like dogs, so the order of topics we would focus on might look something like this. First golden retrievers, then corgis, then cocker spaniels, German shepherds, etc. And then after a few weeks of hard focus, maybe you'll branch out and maybe try cats. If we don't prioritize, we'll only focus on what's directly interesting to us instead of putting an effort into getting a true general understanding of the animal kingdom. Another approach is to generate a basic prioritized list ahead of time. This is better since we're putting more effort into planning, but it's still not a good solution. There are millions of animal species, so sorting them all isn't really feasible. Furthermore, a completely sorted list is kind of overkill, since there will be many animals that we rank as having roughly equal importance. In fact, the whole idea of a sorted list is kind of flawed to begin with, since we want to approach the problem under the assumption that all species are equally important. The system that I think is best is to come up with a mind map, which I'll refer to as our personal priorities or point of view. The mind map classifies the animals into categories. The scientific field dedicated to classification is called taxonomy, and here's what the taxonomy of animals looks like. Animals are broadly categorized into vertebrates and invertebrates, those with and without backbones, and then those each have further subdivisions. You can even keep going if you want to. You'll actually have to go down several layers before you get down to the individual species level. Now that we have the information organized, we can use this to prioritize our efforts. The goal is to shift our focus roughly evenly across the branches. To start with, we might move over to mammals and focus on our favorite dog breed as we did previously. But after finished with that, we can go back to the chart to see what areas need attention. Since we started in the vertebrate section, it would probably be a good idea to move to the invertebrate section. So maybe we can focus on spiders next. Then, after spiders, we can move back to vertebrates. But since we've already been studying something in the mammal class, perhaps we can move over to reptiles and study snakes. So just looking at our first few items, we can already see that we're getting a much better spread over the animal kingdom. And we can continually refer back to our personal priorities to reflect on where we're weakest and then focus on that area next. This particular set of priorities tries to group animals together by their DNA structure, but that might not be the same as what's important to us when we're studying the animal kingdom. The cool thing is that we can structure this however we want in order to make it best reflect our personal values. Since we live in a fairly mammal-centric society, we might decide that we're better off structuring our priority tree like this. Or, depending on who you are, something more extreme like this might make sense. This would lead to a very similar schedule as the example in the beginning, but that's okay because we reach that schedule through deliberate prioritization, and if someone questions whether we're spending our efforts appropriately, we can direct them to our set of priorities, and then we can take the conversation up to a higher level without getting into the weeds of what we happen to be doing at this very moment. So, we've created our taxonomy of animals to prioritize the important animals. My conclusion for this video is that I think we should all make some sort of taxonomy of knowledge to prioritize the important issues. When people are arguing about these issues, they'll often throw out condescending phrases such as, "How can you waste your time thinking about things like that?" Or, "Why are you overcomplicating this?" In these cases, people are referring to their own sense of importance, and these debates tend to go in circles because people have a hard time fathoming how someone else's priorities could be different. When these debates come up, I think it would be helpful if we could take a step back and focus on the root of the conflict by looking at how our priority trees differ. Once we've reached a consensus there, we'll be able to see the forest through the trees, and then working through to the more specific issues won't be as difficult. I did some soul searching to get an idea of what the priorities looked like for me, and I'm going to show it on the screen in a few seconds, but I wanted to give you a chance to skip it since I don't want to bias you. Ideally, you could try going through the exercise yourself first, and then we can compare. I believe that there's a fundamental set of priorities that's common to all of us, so I'm hoping that we can get closer to that by comparing our own attempts. I've included a link in the description below with instructions on how to share your priorities as well as view other shared submissions. You can use whatever structure you want. You don't need to use a mind map. Anyway, here's what I came up with in 3, 2, 1. I'll be spending the rest of the series breaking down this chart, but I'm not going to try and claim that it's correct. In fact, I suspect it's wrong. I'm looking forward to seeing all the comments and submissions because my self-interest in making the series is to see what other people's priorities look like and use this to help ensure that I'm on the right track with my own values. I don't really have any additional resources today. This mind map representation of priorities is just kind of made up. So instead I listed a funny taxonomy that somebody made using superheroes instead of animals.